Assalamu alaikum. Today is day 189 of the war in Sudan. We are now into our 6th month of this terrible nightmare. Yet just 5 years ago, we as Sudanese were filled with such hope, chanting Hurriya, Salam, wa Adala, which means freedom, peace, and justice in the streets of Sudan and in capital cities all over the world. In what was the glorious Sudanese revolution of 2018-2019, which ousted dictator Omar al-Bashir, who ruled with an iron fist for 30 years. We are so incredibly honored to have you all with us here as we gather for the Iowa Forum for Peace and Democracy's 9th conference in Washington, D.C. This panel is called the U.S. Government's Strategy Towards Sudan as the war enters its 6th month. We would like to warmly welcome our officials visiting us from the U.S. government. We also very warmly welcome you, members of the audience who are participating virtually from across the world and in different time zones. Indeed, many of you should be sleeping by now, and we welcome our in-person audience, many of you who have traveled from across the United States. Thank you very much. We will begin our session by introducing our panelists and discussants. We have 2 discussants who will give high-level comments on the IFPD conference objectives, its links to the Sudanese and regional political processes underway. Then we will give the floor over to our officials from the U.S. Department of State and USAID to speak for about 20 minutes. After that, we will have a moderated discussion with our panelists and discussants for about 20 minutes. Finally, we will open up the floor to you, our audience, both in person and online, for a question and answer session, which will last about 20 minutes. For the Q&A session, we ask you to please keep your questions brief and to the point. 1 question per person, please. We would like to give an opportunity for a wide and diverse range of voices and political, civil society, and resistance committee views. And we want to be especially sure to hear questions from women and youth. So we look forward to your participation. Our first panelist, Andrew Lentz, with honorary Sudanese citizenship, is currently the Office Director in the U.S. State Department, Africa Bureau's Office of Sudan and South Sudan Affairs. Over the course of his career, he served at embassies in Damascus, Muscat, Cairo, Kampala, and the consulate in Erbil. Andrew covered Palestinian economic affairs in the Department's Office of Israel and Palestinian Affairs, and was Office Director for the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor's Office of Near Eastern Affairs. Our second panelist, to my right, Jonathan Richter, is currently serving at USAID as the Director of the Office of Sudan and South Sudan Programs in the Africa Bureau in Washington, D.C. Prior to that, he served as the Interim Deputy Assistant Administrator, Conflict Prevention and Stabilization Bureau. His assignments have included Country Representative in Benin, the Deputy Mission Director in the DRC, and the Program Officer in Colombia, Angola, and Mali. Our first discussant, Dr. Mohammed Rajab, a member of the IFPD Secretariat and Conference Co-Chair, was a former university professor at the University of Khartoum, Faculty of Agriculture. He's a national activist, and he has worked against the dictatorial regimes in Sudan. Our second discussant, Mahdi Dawood Al-Khalifa, a member of the IFPD Secretariat and Conference Co-Chair, is an economist and was a former Minister of State of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs during the Third Democratic Government of Sudan. He was an activist against the dictatorships of Nimeri and al-Bashir. I'm your panel moderator. My name is Samah Salman. I have been an executive leader in Sudan's private sector with experience in the agriculture, food processing, food security, and renewable energy industries. I was elected president of Diaspora Civil Society Organization, U.S. Educated Sudanese Association, known as UCISA. established in Sudan with the support of the US Embassy in Khartoum to support the democratic transition of Sudan. So we'll hand it over to Dr. Mohammed to give a brief overview of the IFPD's objectives.
Thank you so much, Samah, and thanks to Andy and Jonathan for being here. All right, I'll be very brief to give the chance for Andy and Jonathan. We had very tremendous, unprecedented interest in the conference from all parties aligned with the December uprising, including political parties, youth and resistance committees, women groups, armed movements, and civic society organizations at the leadership level. That's huge diversity with diverging opinions. The goal of the conference is to reach a political agreement for a unified front against the war and forging the way for civilian democratic rule. This is a process, so we would contend ourselves with at least a declaration of principles to achieve that, and we'll keep hammering. Thank you. I will.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. Ustaz Mahdi, would you like to make some comments? Okay. So we'll hand it over to you, Andrew. We'd like you to talk a little bit more about the revamped U.S. strategy towards Sudan and thoughts about the Jeddah process and any other issues you'd like to talk about.
Thank you so much, Samah. Thank you so much to the discussants at the table. Jonathan, good to be up here with you. And thank you for my honorary Sudanese citizenship and the applause coming in. I hope I can live up to the billing and to the welcome. But thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you today. But I think going back to the way you opened us, Samah, we can't forget that this conflict has gone on too long. And I really do want to acknowledge, before stepping into the broader policy discussion that can often feel bloodless or calculated or whatever other words you want to use, that really the suffering, what is animating us and bring us together is the suffering of your families, your fellow citizens, of the Sudanese people. And that is really what is animating us and animating our policy, is to try and end this conflict. And so also, I think it's important at the outset is to really acknowledge the bravery, your bravery for coming here today to think about, as you said, a hopeful vision for the future, a declaration of principles of how to restart, resume Sudan's democratic transition in the face of atrocity, in the face of hardship and warfare. And so really acknowledging the suffering, but also the bravery of you and of fellow Sudanese. I also want to assure you, I know that you're probably looking at global news and thinking of all of the issues and conflicts and things that could distract US attention during this time. And I want to assure you of this, that the United States and the Biden administration remains focused on Sudan. And we are committed to ending this war. We're committed to addressing the country's humanitarian needs. We're committed to preventing further atrocities and promoting accountability for those responsible for atrocities already committed. And we're committed to supporting the efforts of you here today and of the different civilian leaders and actors who are joining us from around the world and elsewhere in defining the democratic future of your country. So that's really important. I can't say enough. We are focused. This is a top administration priority, Sudan. So now, if I can, and if you'll bear with me, I'd like to go back over the course of events over the past year and a half. And I think it's useful in getting a shared sense of what's been done, getting a shared sense of the trajectory of US policy, and also seeing the issues and the events from which we are learning that are guiding our thinking as we chart the path ahead and refine U.S. policy as you asked us to address. So back, as you recall, Ambassador John Godfrey arrived in Sudan, our first ambassador to Sudan in over 25 years, in August of 2022, and he immediately started to work with all the parties to try and support a Sudanese-led process to resume the country's democratic transition. And the ambassador and his team, with support from Washington, supported what was then the ongoing process of the time, which was the framework political agreement. And we saw very early on, and I think hopefully you would agree, and that can be a question if you'd like later, we can discuss it. But we saw very early on that there were parties and groups, some of whom from the former Bashir regime and others, who were intent on undermining that process from the beginning and continuing efforts that they had been taking to undermine the civilian-led transitional government that preceded October 25, 2021. So this was something we saw, but it was U.S. policy to support as best we could this Sudanese-led process called the FPA. Now, candidly, and this is an important thing that is animating our policy going forward, candidly, that FPA process was not as inclusive or broad-based as it could have been. I think we'd all agree that is a common criticism of the time, and we're aware of it. As you also recall, the FPA process ultimately broke down, and it's our assessment that it broke down over discussions about security sector reform, and specifically the timeline of integration between the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces, and what the command structure would look like. And it was that at the 11th hour that caused that process to break down. And it was really when the leaders of those top leaders of Sudan's security establishment decided to fight each other instead of negotiate or compromise over the future of the country. Now, the US policy response, and it goes through into today and going forward. So immediately, within hours of the outbreak of that conflict, we pressed the parties to get to a ceasefire. Now, initially, of course, that was to be able to allow us to get our people out, to allow also for foreign nationals to be able to get out and find places of safety, but also, importantly, for Sudanese caught in the middle of that conflict and in the middle of intense fighting. And so that was our first effort, was to try and get to a point where there was a break in the fighting to allow people to get to safety, to bury their dead, to be able to take care of immediate needs. And that initial work, that emergency diplomacy, led us to build the foundation to be able to launch the Jeddah talks. Now, the Jeddah talks began on May 5. And as you recall, on May 11, the SAF and the RSF in Jeddah signed the Jeddah Declaration of Commitment to Protect the Civilians of Sudan, which we call often, and you've heard, the Jeddah Declaration, which outlined their obligation under international humanitarian law. Now, while the parties did not repeatedly violated those obligations and did not abide by their commitments under successive ceasefires, that document, that May 11 document, remains a reference document. And it remains something that you as civilians, that we in the international community can continue to refer to, and to which the parties are held accountable. The talks, while imperfect, they did have some successes. And I think we need to remember that too, because it helps us think as we go forward, what's our path? And they helped facilitate humanitarian assistance that, according to our figures, helped approximately 2.5 million people. Again, way below the need, way below Sudan's population, but it allowed, at a time of intense fighting, some breaks that got humanitarian assistance in. Now, we decided to suspend talks on June 21, again, not because we were walking away, not because we were reducing our commitment to the Sudanese people or to ending the conflict, but because the parties were not meeting their commitments. And this is important too, and I want you to remember it going forward. We could not, and we will not allow the parties to use a framework like the JEDA talks to simply buy time, try and gain international credibility, while they continue to try and strengthen their positions on the battlefield and destroy the country. That's why we walked away. That's why we suspended talks. But even as talks have adjourned, that does not mean that the United States has been quiet or has kept our eye off what we need to do and the effort we need to take to try and end this conflict. So since talks adjourned, we've continued to be the leading provider of humanitarian assistance to the Sudanese people, which Jonathan can talk about more in greater depth when he speaks. And while also seeking a negotiated solution, we've kept up the pressure on the parties through other means. Now, I want to also recall back to May 4, and it's important if you go and look at the record, the executive order that the President of the United States issued on May 4. And it stated resolutely in the beginning of that document that it is the policy of the United States to support a transition to democracy and civilian transitional government in Sudan. So really, and you see that from the beginning, this has been a consistent theme and a consistent driver of US policy, and it is there in writing. Please look at it, the May 4 executive order. Then under that order, we have issued sanctions on June 1, on September 6, on September 28, targeting companies and individuals affiliated with both the SAF and the RSF, as well as individuals that we have identified as spoilers seeking to undermine Sudan's democratic transition. We've also used visa restrictions and other tools to again, target individuals who are trying to undermine the democratic transition and also who have committed gross violations of human rights. We have led the international community in seeking present and future accountability, most notably and recently through our work with like-minded partners at the Human Rights Council to set up an independent international fact-finding mission for Sudan, which we hope will lay the foundation and be able to provide the groundwork or the fact base for local domestic justice mechanisms as well as international justice mechanisms. We have also been resolute and unequivocal in our support for Sudanese civilian efforts to shape the future of the country and determine how to manage the post-conflict democratic transition. I also want to remind you of the Secretary's May 22nd video message to the Sudanese people. And he made it clear in that message. And again, it echoes what the President said on May 4th. So on May 22nd, the Secretary came out and said it is up to Sudanese civilians to determine Sudan's future, not the warring parties, not the generals, but Sudan's civilians. Ambassador Godfrey echoed that again, emphasizing on the one-year anniversary of his arrival in Khartoum, again, emphasizing that through their conduct in the war, it had become clear that neither the SAF nor the RSF was fit to govern in a post-conflict Sudan. So we have been on record from the beginning that we are supporting Sudanese civilian efforts and democratic government in Sudan. Ambassador Godfrey has continued to travel widely from Washington. He's traveled to the region frequently. He's in fact in the region now, meeting with a wide array of civilian actors. And that's not just the normal actors. That's not just the ones with whom we were working before the conflict erupted. But it has been meeting with representatives, women's groups, historically marginalized groups, and people in the periphery outside of Khartoum, with trade unions, grassroots, civil society organizations, political parties, other activists, individuals who look very much like this room. And I really do want to congratulate the Iowa Forum for bringing this diverse group of people together, not just here, but across the world. And I also want to assure you this, because this is important going forward as a core framework of our policy. But we are not determining who among civilian leaders are going to lead. We're not trying to pick winners of what group or what initiative is the one that's going to set the pace or set the course of Sudan's future. We are, as we have throughout, throwing our weight behind you, behind Sudanese civilians. And we are supporting with patience and perseverance what we know is an incredibly difficult process. Incredibly difficult to begin to put together the principles. It makes it sound easy. Let's do a declaration of principles, but we know how hard that is. And so our repeated refrain, and we continue to say it over and over again in all of our engagements, is that this has to be broad-based and inclusive. Women, youth, marginalized communities must be at the table, not just sitting there listening, but active participants in charting the course of the country. I think as we are ready to be patient and persevere with you, I think you would all agree, and I hope we can talk about this too in the discussion, but that there is a sense of urgency to this. And that as this conflict continues, we are hearing more and more from groups of civilians like you that Sudanese civilians need to come together to take those first steps in what will be an iterative process to form that pro-democracy front and to address the transition and governance issues. So if I've got 5 minutes left, am I fine?
Over by 2 minutes, Andrew.
I'm over by 2 minutes. Well, I'm going back. I'm on Sudanese time then. So let me, if I may, let me do a couple more points on the way of going forward. So going forward, we continue to work with energy and determination to get the parties back into talks in Jeddah, to facilitate humanitarian assistance deliveries, to achieve ceasefires and other confidence-building measures, and to build in a step-by-step process to a permanent cessation of hostilities. We are receiving strong demand signals from Sudanese actors across the political spectrum and throughout the country that their number one priority is to end the fighting. We have heard this, and we are throwing our diplomatic weight behind efforts to do that. We see Jeddah, the Jeddah talks, as the most viable platform to get something started in the near term. But we want to be clear. We do not expect the Jeddah talks to end the conflict or produce a final resolution. And we all have to be clear, and we certainly are in the policy, in US policy, that we expect, and it's highly possible that the sides, the RSF and the SAF, are going to continue fighting, that we'll continue to see horrific atrocities, even while we are negotiating. But what we hope is that the talks will facilitate humanitarian assistance deliveries, that we can create some of those ceasefires that create space to ease some of the immediate suffering, and that we can create some momentum toward a permanent cessation of hostilities. And we fundamentally believe that it's better to have people in a room talking than to not have them in a room talking. We have also been clear that achieving a permanent cessation of hostilities requires addressing political and other issues. And the SAF and the RSF cannot alone pronounce on those. You, Sudanese civilians, must be the central voice in defining what that looks like. So at some point, there will be an intersection between what we're trying to do in Jeddah, which is create that space to build momentum off of ceasefires and build toward a cessation of hostilities, that Sudanese civilians are driving that political process. So at some point we can move and intersect those two together under civilian control. Again, we'll continue to engage civilians, supporting their efforts to coalesce around a pro-democracy civilian front that can deal with the transition and governance issues. And it's important that Sudanese civilians organize themselves so that there is some credible civilian entity to which power can be transferred in the context of a cessation of hostilities. The process, as I understand, tomorrow, very likely, there could be another big grouping of Sudanese civilians gathering in Addis Ababa to try and pull together a pro-democracy civilian front. We see that as timely and important, much as we see this effort here as timely and important. And again, the message there, the message here, the message in all of our engagements is that all of these must be broadly inclusive and representative, more so than the FPA process was. Finally, we will continue to identify tools, ways to use tools at our disposal to seek accountability and to prevent further atrocities through sanctions and other tools. And we will continue to lead international and regional efforts to prevent actors from providing material support to the belligerent parties that will only continue to extend this conflict. So I hope that gives an overview both of where we've come from, that you understand the trajectory of US policy and what is animating our future course, and that you've got a sense of what we're trying to do and laying the foundation for. And with that, I'll stop.
Thank you so much, Andrew. That was very insightful. You've gone over by 5 minutes, so we'll have to keep you here an extra 5 minutes. Okay. Thank you for making it clear that the United States supports a broad-based, inclusive, civilian-led process to chart the future of Sudan. I think that was a very important statement. Our next panelist will be Jonathan Richter from USAID. Jonathan, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said that the scale and speed of Sudan's descent into death and destruction is unprecedented. UN humanitarian chief Martin Griffiths has said that Sudan is currently the most challenging spot in the world today for humanitarian workers. Now, given that, tell us a little bit about what USAID is doing to respond to the humanitarian crisis in Sudan.
Thank you. My pleasure to do so. And I first want to say that I was talking to my colleague Andy earlier today, and I informed him I was going to try and find a way to throw him under the bus or undermine him. And then I saw him showing up late. I thought, this is my chance. I saw the young the nice gentleman pointing to his watch. I said, yes, I got the crowd on my side. And then Andy comes in, gets applause and a special honorary title. I feel robbed. Thanks to the Iowa Forum for organizing this. And thanks to all the Sudanese counterparts who are here in the room today and virtually for taking the time to deal with this important issue on the crisis in Sudan. And thank you. I also want to just say and express my deepest sympathies to your families, to yourselves, to your communities for the catastrophe that you all are enduring today. I really want to underscore at the top what Andy said earlier, which is USAID, USG, the US government. We continue to stand with the people of Sudan. And the horrific deterioration of circumstances does not change that in the least. And our commitment is to you and the aspirations that so many have demonstrated for peace and for freedom of autocracy. So we will continue to give you our very best in terms of supporting those in serious humanitarian crisis, as well as support the countless civilians like yourselves who are working to improve their communities and promoting the transition to civilian rule. I won't go into the impacts that this has had. I took some notes beforehand to talk about the scale, but I think you all already know the scale. But I will say a word about the challenges, and that the challenges are overwhelming on many different levels. Obviously, there are widespread shortages around basic essential items that you mentioned in the humanitarian system. The health system is at the breaking point. Many of the hospitals are inoperable, overcrowded, lack of services, medicines, water. The economy, we were just talking about the economy earlier. the markets, the inflation, the banking system, the looting of personal property that so many people in this very room have had happen to them or their families directly. And then you get into the issues of humanitarian assistance. You have targeting of workers, aid workers, looting of supplies, and various impediments to making it work. I mean, visas, having the ability for people to get in and help and support is really important. And it sounds bureaucratic, but it's a very real thing that all impacts. And then you have the human rights situation, which is taking a stronger ethnic tone of late in the widespread use of sexual violence. So the challenges are enormous, and our assistance is really geared towards the humanitarian aspect to provide support to those who are in the greatest need, and as well as development assistance to help support people who are trying to create a new path. I'll talk about both of those. But basically, I want to just emphasize, number one, that our leadership in the mission and our technical experts are in the region. They are not here. We recognized early on the importance of the presence in the field so that we could engage with activists, people who are leaders who are in the region, people from Sudan, as well as the implementing partners we work with to make sure that we're able to effectively oversee our assistance. And then the second thing I want to hit at the top is that even though the majority of our work is channeled through the UN system and through international NGOs, the vast majority of our work is implemented by people on the ground, local initiatives, local groups. And that is really fundamental to our work. Sudanese people who've courageously taken on action to support their communities. Our goal is to empower those who are on the front lines, and they're essential to delivery of any kind of assistance. To the humanitarian assistance front, we are the largest donor in Sudan. I will repeat this number, $873 million in 2023. That's a sizable commitment, and it's a demonstration of the commitment of the U.S. government for the people. And although we recognize this is not going to help solve the problem, it is going to help keep people alive. And so we're committed to helping the nearly 5.5 or more displaced people. In some of the areas in which we provide in our humanitarian assistance are emergency food, nutrition, cash assistance, healthcare, drinking water, sanitation, shelter, and protection services for those who've been abused sexually, psychosocial support, medical support for those who are in need. And again, a lot of this is through local initiatives. We've heard about the emergency response rooms that have cropped up, as well as the RCs that are making things happen on the ground. I think we just have to recognize these aid workers who are there. It is the most dangerous place for an aid worker. 19 people have died this year in Sudan. Aid workers have, and we just have to recognize that they're being detained, they're being injured, and they're being killed, and yet they continue to risk their lives out there to deliver humanitarian assistance, to get people to safety, and to help mediate local level conflicts. That's incredibly important work. And so what I take away from that is that this is a demonstration of the commitment of the Sudanese people to civic action. And this is very special. This is very special, and it is reminiscent of what we saw during the peaceful protests that led to the fall of Bashir. In the resilience in the face of that, it is extraordinary, and it should give the world hope that the commitment and resilience of the Sudanese people is enough to help overcome the challenges, however enormous they are. It certainly gives me hope and inspiration. can I talk a little bit about our, okay.
Like,
Yeah, I know some of us,
go ahead.
I'll save for later anything on interference and impediments in the system, but I'll just say a quick word on development assistance. When I think of our humanitarian assistance, I think of the serious gravity of the situation that people in Sudan face today. When I think of our development assistance, I think of, honestly, some of the lost potential of what's been lost. Because in the lead up during the transition, the US government was poised to put forth $700 million in development assistance to help support this transition. And the arrest of Prime Minister Hamdok derailed that. We were able to get a good fraction of that. And of course, respond in a different way to the new context. But the thrust of what we're doing is we're supporting civil society, civic engagement in three main areas. One is the emergency response, which is very similar to the humanitarian work. The second is around survival of civil society and local initiatives, women's groups, youth groups, building their capacities through small grants to do various types of initiatives, whether it's monitoring human rights abuses, infrastructure, small infrastructure rehabilitation, such as medical units, youth centers, keeping people active, peace building types of things. And also the final aspect is really on dialogue. And that dialogue happens much like this is happening here, dialogue at various levels, the grassroots level, at senior levels of civil society, and we're poised to support high-level engagement. And these engagements are so important. We look to bridge because obviously getting people together, talking them through, people aren't going to agree on everything, but there are areas where people can build a shared sense of what does have to happen. And dialogue is the way to get there, in my opinion. As we work at the different levels, one of the challenges going forward is how we link the lower levels to the higher level. That's exceptionally important and challenging, but it's the thing where my colleague Andy said earlier, having inclusion, having an ability to have an inclusive process is vital for credibility and long-term viability. And so we're in that mix as well, trying to be supportive of that. I think I'll stop there and just say that our assistance continues, our commitment continues. Thank you for your attention. Ready for your thoughts, comments, and questions. Over.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Next, we'll move to our next segment, which is the moderated discussion. I will pose questions to Andy and Jonathan. I'll ask Dr. Mohammed and Ustaz Mahdi as discussants to please provide your thoughts and comments. So first question is to you, Andy. Jonathan, please feel free to provide your remarks and inputs as well. So many in the audience are curious about the US's position with regard to civilian engagement in the negotiation process to end the war and the post-war civilian democratic transition and the details of that. However, before that process can start, the war must stop. So far, the flow of money and guns into Sudan has both sides armed to the teeth. There are credible reports of arms shipments from the UAE under the guise of aid, which I'm sure many of us have seen in the media. Arms shipments from countries like Turkey, Iran, and Russia's Wagner Group, among others. And we're talking about both sides, SAF and RSF. Sudan, according to reports, is the second largest purchaser of weapons from Russia in Africa, after Algeria. In terms of financial flows, the US has imposed targeted sanctions on the likes of Abderrahim Dagalo of the RSF, Ali Karti, an Islamist of the Bashir regime, and several SAF, RSF companies, and a Russian company. Yet much of the financial flows, including that of the SAF and RSF, comes from sources such as gold, which flows through the Gulf countries. Why are we not, as the US and the international community, doing more on arms embargoes, expanding the Darfur arms embargo to all of Sudan, taking the Darfur arms embargo more seriously, stemming the arms trafficking and freezing more assets financing these arms into Sudan? Wouldn't this help stop the atrocities, especially the ethnic cleansing in Darfur?
Thank you. And that is absolutely the right question to ask. It is a core part of our approach, a core part of our diplomacy. We know the importance of addressing this issue. And I think, let me start with a couple of, you mentioned the media. Really important that we have journalists out there covering this. And also civil society organizations who investigate into these things. The work of journalists, the work of civil society organizations is absolutely essential and will continue to be essential as we try and track and understand how the SAF and the RSF and the parties to this conflict are trying to sustain their ability to prosecute the war, to be able to finance the war, and to continue the suffering of the people. So I think, one, thank goodness we've got good journalists out there. Thank goodness we've got good civil society organizations who are really looking into this. Their work is essential, and we certainly benefit from it in the US government, and I know our like-minded partners do as well. I think the question, before we get to the question, and there's no doubt, I agree with you, Samah, that always we could do more. There's absolutely we could do more. Let me also start by saying what we have done and what we continue to do, and then maybe that helps us figure out where the gaps are. But one thing, as you said, we are trying to identify and use the tools that we have, the sanctions tools and the authorities, to really get at some of the supply chains and the avenues and the ways that the parties are trying to prosecute this war. So as you mentioned, we've named companies, we've targeted companies on both sides, the SAF and the RSF, big companies, substantial companies that we have assessed are part of the war effort and part of their what they need to get the arms and to continue to prosecute the war. We will continue to try and identify those targets, again, working with our partners where we can to make sure that those hurt and that they have effect. We also want to make sure that they're as broad-based as we can. We're working very closely with our international partners. I hope you've noticed that the United Kingdom has also put out sanctions that very closely mirror what the United States has done and vice versa. I know that the European Union is putting out a framework for sanctions that can help it begin to tighten the noose around the international chains and finance networks and supply chains that the parties are going to use. So that's very important. We've sanctioned, we'll continue to sanction, we'll continue to identify targets and see how we can make them more effective in partnership with our international partners. The other thing that's really important is the non-sanctioned things that we've done. And on June 1, we also issued an update to it was a gold advisory. It was an advisory on 2 private sector corporations and businesses that they should look at all gold that is coming out of Sudan as conflict affected. Now, that's an important message and a signal to businesses throughout the world. And it really tries to get at that issue of supply chains, that the more we can put it out there, that we show that the United States is watching, that gold that's coming through the system is going to be tracked and known, and that the companies bear a reputational risk for dealing in Sudanese gold, that was one of the things that we tried to put out there to be able to get at exactly what you're talking about. Then we followed up that action with a much broader advisory on gold that was more continent-wide. And it began to look at the intersections with Wagner's role and different other actors in the African context, and began to help us looking at where that gold is going and flowing and through what markets. So those are important tools, and they really bring into the equation the private sector as partners in trying to end this conflict, or dry up the resources that the parties are using to prosecute the war. We also, another part of how we're trying to get at it is through our diplomatic work. And that's been really intense, and we continue to do it, working very closely with the different international initiatives out there, with IGAD and their heads of state, the quartet heads of state, also with the Neighbors Forum that the government of Egypt hosted the first one, and then it was in N'Djamena in Chad. And if you notice that all of those communiques that came out of those mentioned very clearly and unequivocally that there was united voice to make sure that malign actors did not interfere in the conflict, to bring in material support and sustain the conflict. So it was important. Now, of course, things are still, you know, the reporting in the press is saying that things are still getting in. That's a real problem. But it's important to really knit together the diplomatic and international and regional approach to this, and make sure that there's a unified voice and a unified message that this is not going to be tolerated, and that we're all looking at it and trying to stop it. So that's important, is to continue that. And third and finally, the other big thing that we're doing is, of course, trying to end the war. And the faster we can end the war, the faster that we can build momentum through these ceasefires, the faster that we can get to a cessation of hostilities and a return to civilian democratic governance, then the risk of contagion that this is going to go outside of Sudan, and the risk and the time that other countries will have to be able to come in and fuel this conflict goes down. So those are three big things that we have done, that we continue to do, and that we're continuing to looking for ways to strengthen so that we can get at exactly what you're talking about.
Thank you, Andy. And if we had more time, I could probably go into more detail with you about this, but thank you for that very, deep, your deep and detailed remarks, and so giving us a very comprehensive view on that. Second question, Dr. Mohammed, Ustaz Mahdi, would you like to comment?
Thank you very much, Andy and Jonathan, for this comprehensive and integrated presentation. Although, while we genuinely value the initiatives aimed at assisting Sudan in ending the ongoing conflict and progressing towards democracy, I have a reservation about the capacity of the political parties involved, as well as the role of Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. Regrettably, it appears that the United States has not taken its independent initiative, but has been aligning its approach with that of Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. This concern arises from the belief that Sudanese political parties, whether individually or collectively, may not possess the necessary capability to lead the country effectively through this complex process of ending the war and transitioning to democracy. Their track record and internal division cast doubt on their ability to provide the strong and united leadership required during this critical period. Furthermore, the involvement of Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates in Sudan affairs has raised concerns about whether their interests align with the Sudanese, with the need and aspiration of the Sudanese people. It is essential to ensure that any external actor involvement respect the principles and sovereignty of self-determination and genuinely support the pursuit of peace and democratic governance in Sudan. Regarding United States, there is a perception that its approach appears to be influenced by the policies and interests of Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. Ideally, Sudan's transition to democracy would benefit from an independent and well-balanced approach from the United States, taking into consideration the unique complexities of the situation and the need of the Sudanese people. I don't think Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates are genuine in solving the Sudanese problem, and I don't think that they can achieve, helping Sudan to achieve a civil government, a civilian government, and transition into democracy. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Ustaz. No, I think, and thank you for the candid question. And I think that's the value of this, of being here in person so that we can engage on this. I guess I want to answer it by saying we are pursuing, and that's why I went over the history of our engagement and our way ahead, but pursuing different and concurrent lines of effort. That is, it's important to say in our policy approach, we see them as concurrent, mutually supportive, but different. And in one is we are committed, as I've said, to supporting Sudanese civilian efforts to define the democratic future of their country. And so that's why we are putting a lot of diplomatic effort into helping to foster and facilitate and support and encourage civilians to come together in various places, in various capitals, in different ways, to come together and begin to coalesce and find unified voice in what the transition looks like, what future governance looks like and should be, and to begin to chart the course toward a political process that can lead to elections and a democratic future. So that is one line of effort that we are following. The United States is leading and working very closely with our like-minded efforts in the Troika, throughout the region, with the African Union, with IGAD, with the IGAD Quartet heads of state, to really try and move that process forward. At the same time, there is a recognition that we've got to stop the shooting, that we have to silence the guns, and that we have to find partners with leverage over the parties to be able to do that quickly. And so that's why in May 4th, and before May 4th, as we work toward it, we figured that the Jeddah talks, hosted by Saudi Arabia, gave a chance to get the parties to the table. That we had to work through the Quad and with the Quad in recognition of the fact that the United Arab Emirates has leverage over some of what's happening in Sudan. So does Saudi Arabia. So does the United States of America. And so we felt it was important to take advantage of that, to use that platform to try and do to achieve a very narrow set of goals. Stop the shooting, facilitate some humanitarian access, and begin to pave the way toward a future cessation of hostilities. Now, this is the important, and it is very important to stress, it's narrow. The purpose of Jeddah is not to define the future of Sudan. The purpose of those talks in Jeddah is to try and ease the suffering and stop the shooting. Now, the important thing is at some point, the lines of effort need to come together. And so that's where it's so important for Sudanese civilians like yourselves to really begin to come together with a sense of urgency, but deliberately and inclusively and in a broad-based framework to come together and provide that political space that can provide the platform for a cessation of hostilities going forward. And I think, and so that's the hope, is that Jeddah can work. We get to a place of ceasefires, we move toward a cessation of hostilities, and that then there is a civilian process led by Sudanese who are charting a political course forward into which who can then take it going forward. So that's the idea. Yeah.
And thank you for that clarification. The second question is to you, Jonathan. Andy, please feel free to provide your input as well. Up until the war started, Sudan has been one of the most generous hosts of refugees in the world. Sudan was the 6th largest host of refugees and the 2nd in Africa, hosting 1.1 million refugees from South Sudan, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Syria, Central African Republic, Chad, Yemen, and various other countries. Today, Sudan is in a desperate humanitarian situation with the largest number of displaced persons in the world. UN Secretary General months back indicated that $3 billion, a number which has since steadily increased, is needed to fund the humanitarian need inside Sudan, including that in border countries such as Chad, Egypt, Ethiopia, and South Sudan. Yet only a fraction of that amount has been funded. USAID has been the lead donor to Sudan so far, and Jonathan, you've been very clear about the fact that 873 million has been funded by USAID in 2023. However, the need is so much greater. Sudanese still seem to be falling lower in the priority ranks, especially after the crisis in Israel, Palestine, Ukraine, and other crises. We know that you're doing your absolutely best to keep Sudan in the spotlight, but there are limited resources and competing interests. So shouldn't more be done by the US?
Thank you. I mean, first, to recognize what Sudan has done in the past to absorb refugees from other countries, I think is absolutely notable. And in this particular instance, we follow very closely the refugees who have now spread onto other countries. So it's now the reverse. It's 1.1 million or thereabouts of people who have either fled or are returning to their former countries where they had originally come from. Yes, the need is mind blowing. $3 billion. It's just extraordinary. And yet we have to be realistic about what's possible. This is where we run into big challenges because the signals are globally writ large. We do not see it as possible to sustain as an agency the levels of humanitarian dollars that we've had in past years. And so we ourselves are already looking writ large as an agency on figures coming down, and that's going to impact everything. And so this is where the urgency comes from us to focus on areas where we can be more efficient. And this is where we get into the issues of humanitarian access that is a key foundational point in terms of working with the parties of the conflict, minimizing the bureaucratic impediments that are in place that are stopping things from flowing. It's got to be more efficient. But then this is also the time where we really have to go into high gear on our advocacy with other donors. I mean, last year, I believe we were over 90% of the overall humanitarian aid in Sudan. It's just not realistic. And so I think now that we're going into this phase of reduced budgets, I think we're really going to have to count on other donors to come in and to start to make a commitment as well. Stop there.
Dr. Mohammed, Mahdi, would you like to make any comments?
Thank you. I'll be very brief so that it gives a chance for the question and answers. Thanks to Andy and Jonathan for all the efforts and the vision. And the civilian engagement that they emphasized is very, very important indeed. That the civilians are to be leading the process, the political process. The emphasis of this is extremely important. And indeed, ending the fighting is the highest priority. And all the pressures need to be intensified to pressure the fighting parties, as well as the foreign actors who are bringing ammunition and bringing weapons to fuel the conflict. The other thing is the humanitarian aid. The people are really suffering and hurting. We do appreciate the efforts that there are in place, but it's still a lot, as Jonathan said, we probably need it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. Now we'll move on to our question and answer session. We'll start with our in-person Q&A session. We'll open up the floor to our in-person audience. We kindly ask the following. You will have the opportunity to ask one question. We ask you to please keep your questions brief and to the point. We'll ask you to come up to the podium. And we'd like to hear from a wide and diverse range of voices from political, civil society, resistance committees, women and youth. We look forward to your participation. If you would like to speak in Arabic, we're happy to translate. That's no problem at all. Please raise your hands. Yes, please. So we'll take a group of 3 questions. Second question, any women and youth? Fatma, please. Fatma. I think we had a youth speaker. Yes, please come up. Do we have any other questions? Okay, so we have 4 questions. So let's take these, and then if you can please, I mean, we'd appreciate brevity, and then we can get a few more questions in and group them together. So thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Sabah. Thank you, Mr. Andy and Jonathan. My name is Osama Mustafa from New York City. I would like to thank you for your effort in ending our suffering and horrible misery in our country. We appreciate that. I'm going to squeeze all my questions together.
No, sorry, Osama, please, one question, please.
If you don't mind, I'm going to just ask Mr. Andy 3 questions.
Osama, I'm sorry, we have one question for each speaker, please? Yeah, one question, please.
Okay.
Your most important question, please.
Right, so I'm going to waive the question to Mr. Jonathan, to Mr. Andy.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Osama.
All right, so Mr. Andy, you said that you wanted to end atrocities and stop it and help people accountable. How would you do that if you bring in the same players without any sanctioning to the Lord of the War and without any accountability? You're putting the same play and expecting the same product. How that happen? The second question is from Wall Street Journal, August 10, that shows that United Arab Emirates is shipping weapons through Uganda to Sudan. I wanted to ask you a question. Piggyback on my brother Mahdi question. Why United Arab Emirates is still at the part of the mediation of our conflict in Sudan? Why we cannot exclude this country that provide weapons to one of the tactics and in the war, one of the generals. The last question.
Sorry, Osama, please. I'm sorry, Ustaz Osama. One question, please, so that we can give an opportunity to diverse number of speakers. So thank you very much. Your point is very clear. Thank you. Can we please just Fatma, please, let's line up. Our youth speaker, can you please come up? There's a lady here. Would you please come up? We'll take the question as a group. We're running a little bit tight on time.
Okay.
One question, please, and brief and to the point. Thank you. Thank you.
Brief.
Thank you.
My name is Osman. I'm from New York also. United States is very strong in terms of observing what is going on. You can see very obviously what is going on around our region in terms of weapons, in terms of who's shooting what. We, the Sudanese people, are not happy about the cessation of fire and broken promises over and over between the 2 warring parties. Why the United States is not taking a stronger stand on stopping these warring factions from firing to each other? Why not stopping them from firing rockets, imposing no fly zones? Because what killing people the most is this bombarding by airplanes on rockets. And the United States can see every little thing that's flying anywhere in the world. You can't tell me you can't see that.
Yeah.
You guys see that. Why not taking that as same way we did in Iraq back in the days, in the 90s?
Aywa.
That would have saved a lot of life. Thank you so much.
Shukran. Thank you so much. Thank you for your excellent question, Fatma. Please, the floor is yours for your question.
Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your efforts too. My question is, you said that the Jeddah member, like the goals of the Jeddah member to stop the war, there is any scenario about the disarming for the RSF, like the rapid support forces? There is any scenario to disarm? Because this is a challenge too. To stop the war, that does not mean the peace, because we have a lot of peace agreements in Darfur, but the war is not stopped. This is the first question. Sorry, Samah, the second question.
No, sorry, Fatma, one question, please. Lala, what, please, sorry. One question, please, Fatma. Thank you. Thank you, Fatma. Lala, thank you, Fatma. Fatma, one question, please. Okay.
Also, the US understand that the peace in Sudan, that means stop ISIS to get the Sudan, because you know what happened in Gaza right now. Now the Islamic Brotherhood also speaking about the jihad in Gaza. If they don't give the Sudan the opportunity to get the peace, that means also you are suffering from ISIS.
Thank you, Fatma. Shukran jazilan. Mohammed, please proceed with your question. And then we'll take the last question.
Hello, everyone. My thing is not a question, it's more of a statement and just my idea of the conflict. And as a younger generation, seeing everyone here, what I think and what I see in the future.
Mohammed, do you have a specific question though?
Most of them were covered.
And we'll be very happy to listen to you. Like, and we'd appreciate if you can please brevity.
For sure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, I stand before you today not just as a son, brother, and a friend, but as a Sudanese citizen who has been fortunate enough to call Qatar and the United States home. Yet underneath all the opportunities provided to me by my family and the countries I have had the pleasure of calling home, I am simply a part of the beautiful tapestry that is Sudan. I share this with you to emphasize the incredible potential that resides in this great nation. And as I look around this room, I see a gathering of remarkable individuals, each with a unique story, a shared heritage, and a collective hope for a brighter future. In the short time I've spent with some of you here, I've been moved by the stories you've shared, the narratives echoed in my heart, reinforced what I've always known, the true difference between us, our families, and friends across the world lies in the opportunities we have been given. I can say with the utmost pride, respect, and appreciation that my journey, like many of yours, is intricately woven into the sacrifice and aspiration of our parents. My mother, the oldest of 8, my father, the oldest of 11, are living testimonies
About 100
to the strength of the Sudanese spirit. To understand
down to about
how I got here is to comprehend that I had no role in my journey, in my own journey. It's the convergence of geopolitics, policy, and the unstoppable grit of the people of Sudan, people like you, your families who left behind their lives to ensure a future of their children. I won't stand before you today claiming to hold the solution to the complex conflict that plagues our beloved Sudan. I could stand here for hours and describe the myriad issues, factions, and injustices that afflict our nation, offering my personal opinion and analysis, but I won't subject you to that agony. Instead, I want to leave you with something deeply personal. Me, Muhammad Abdul Jalil, a humble individual, a mere blimp in the grand narrative of the Sudanese people, their relentless pursuit of happiness for themselves and their families. As we convene here with the world seemingly teetering on the precipice of uncertainty, I have never been more hopeful. I leave you with the words of Ernest Hemingway from his 1926 novel, The Sun Also Rises, gradually then all at once. And I do genuinely believe that change occurs just that way. It starts slowly, almost unstoppable and transformative, and then happens in an instant. It becomes a force of nature, unstoppable and transformative. Together, we are the force. We are the embodiment of the Sudanese resilience and courages and dreams. We, the sons and daughters of Sudan, are the custodians of a legacy that stretches back through time. And it's our collective determination that will usher in the change we so fervently desire. Let us continue to work tirelessly side by side towards a Sudan that is peaceful, just, and democratic. With unwavering hope, let us bring about the change. Bring about the change gradually, then all at once. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mohammed, and thank you speaking for so many of us. And our last speaker from the floor.
Going to be very easy and direct to the point. Thank you guys for being here, and thank you, Aywa, to approach this opportunity for everyone to be in the one room. My question is direct. I'm a woman. I'm always care about women. Women, they face rape in Sudan, and unfortunately, you guys, during the statement, I did not hear anything about Sudan. Women in Sudan, they're facing rape. They're using rape as one of the weapons on Sudan. And unfortunately, recently we hear they took women as a hostage and they sell women in a border as a slave too. My questions, what US they're gonna do through this? I did not hear any statement from US, unfortunately. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. We appreciate that question. Abdul Majid, can you hear me? Can you unmute?
Yes, I do hear you.
Thank you, Abdul Majid. I think we have 4 hands online. If you could please assist us in taking those 4 questions, the first 4 questions you have online. What we'll then do is have them ask their questions. Jonathan and Andy have been very diligently taking notes, and so we'll have all the questions, and then unfortunately, we will have to end in about 5 minutes with, 5 minutes with Jonathan and about 10 minutes with Andy. So if we can have those questions from the virtual audience, please, Majid, the first 4 hands, and then we'll go to the answers. Thank you so much.
Actually, Samah, I have almost like 7 people that raising their hand. Okay, let me go. How many people do you want me to give them the opportunity to ask questions?
First 4 in the queue. The first 4 in the queue.
Okay, sure.
Jonathan, Andy, can we, in a couple of months' time, can we have a second follow-up session?
Absolutely.
Okay, so this will not be the last session with Jonathan and Andy. We'll have more opportunities to speak to them and hear from them. So we'll take the first 4 hands, please, Abdul Majid. Thank you so much.
Professor Suad Ali, please unmute yourself.
Thank you very much indeed. I would like to thank you all very much indeed, the organizers of the Iowa conference and the panelists and the speakers and Samah, of course. I'm going to put my question within the context of what Dr. Susan Keenan has indicated when she maintained that to date, the international community has focused on humanitarian responses and a flawed peace process, which relies on the good faith of those very warlords responsible for the catastrophe. while humanitarian assistance and preparations for an inclusive peace process are vital, the prevention of further atrocities and the holding of perpetrators accountable must be a key component of the international policy towards Sudan. In particular, support for an alternative civilian national government has to be part of any negotiation if Sudan is to attain a secure and successful future. End of Dr. Keenan's statement. So with all due respect to all the United States is doing, without such a civilian transitional government, all aid provided is abused by the military dictatorship by this General Burhan and his totalitarian regime. And the president, totalitarian dictator Burhan came after he staged a military coup against a very remarkable revolution that Sudan witnessed in 2018, that many have left their lives in that. Sudan has witnessed 3 actually revolutions, remarkably. Now, with such an individual who was illegitimate, the United States is talking to him, the international community is talking to him, the UN invites him to come to the assembly, the National Assembly, to speak on behalf of the Sudanese people that he staged his military coup against them, who is rejected completely by them. So until when is the international community, or especially the United States, going to stop talking to dictatorship or dictators who come to power against the revolutions? Now,
Thank you, Professor Suad. Thank you.
Now,
Thank you,
just to conclude, thank you very much, Samah. I really want, to hear from the State Department in particular. Why is this, talking to dictators when they are illegitimate and they don't represent the Sudanese people? Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Dr. Suad.
Thank you, Professor Saad. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have the second.
Number 2 out of 4.
Number 2, Wajida.
Thank you.
Wajida, I will be unmuting you. Unmute yourself, please.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Abdul Majid, and thank you to all the speakers. I really appreciate this opportunity. My name is Wajid Al-Haj. I've been involved in grassroots movements supporting Sudanese democracy and advocacy groups. I'd like to reiterate the importance of stopping the conflict and fighting, as all the others have stated. My question has to do mainly with the aid, particularly medical aid and humanitarian aid. There's been no steady flow of supplies. Majority of them have been blocked by the SAF for security reasons, quote unquote, or looted by the RSF. Some surgical supplies have been blocked for over a month in Wad Medani. This week on 10/18, the 18th of October, MSF, which is Doctors Without Borders or Médecins Sans Frontières, has stopped life-saving surgery in Bashair Hospital in Khartoum, and the Turkish hospital will be running out of supplies in the upcoming week. About 42 refugees died of starvation in a refugee camp in east of Chad. Little to no aid has been reaching the East Chad refugee camps. Dialysis patients have died, almost all of them in Janina. And there's been a new multi-billion-dollar aid package that has been reported today, actually. And it's only singled out Ukraine and Israel. Yet reports have not mentioned Sudan among the multi-billion-dollar package stated by President Biden. And Sudan has been among the worst humanitarian crises in the planet, with the most displaced people in the world exceeding the numbers of Ukraine. So what strategies specifically, because it's been 6 months now of promises, do you have in ensuring the aid reaches Khartoum and refugee camps outside of Sudan? Because it has not been in the past 6 months. These are what the figures have been proving. And how will you be involving more youth, women, and resistance committees within several of their initiatives in further talks and processes? Thank you.
Thank you, Wajida.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Wajida. Thank you. And I
All
just
right.
want to take a quick second to the audience in person and online to say, thank you so much for your enthusiasm. Thank you for your questions. please forgive me for cutting some of you off. We promise, I have Jonathan here and we have Andy here. We promise to have a follow-up session in which we'll continue to engage, have this dialogue and speak more. They actually have an appointment, so they have to rush to another commitment. So they're unable to stay any longer. So we only have a few more minutes. So what I'll kindly ask of you, Abdul Majid, is if you can take the last two questions and then we'll hand it back over to Jonathan and to Andy. And again, thank you for your enthusiasm. This is the interest, this is the engagement, this is the dialogue. This is exactly what we're looking for. So please forgive me again if I've cut you off. It's just an issue, a challenge of time management. So we'll take the next two questions, please, Abdul Majid.
Okay, next will be Manal. But also I want to just to let you know that we have a couple of questions in the chat, but I don't think we're going to get them. Go ahead.
I promise to schedule a follow-up session. We promise to do that. So we'll take the next two questions, please, Abdul Majid. Thank you so much.
Manal, would you please unmute yourself? Go ahead.
Hello.
Yeah, we hear you. Go ahead.
Yes, you hear me. Actually, it's a request more than a question. You know that we have some modality of cash in Sudan. We use Hawala from international, and internally we use application with one of the banks. It's called Banket. It's really our market depends on it because now there is a problem with the cash notes. So I'm wondering if you can really consider supporting any support like programming support for this kind of applications or kind of IT, so can allow people in diaspora and people in Sudan to lift it up a little the inflation, because this is the money now. This is the type of money we are using now, more than the cash, more the banknotes in our hands. So this I really want to consider some support of this non-food programming as a humanitarian, because it's important for the market to continue. The second thing also I want you to consider that we have 9 million students out of school, and there is no actually any plan to support them. If they are in refugee in Egypt and in most of other countries, but it's very difficult for the students like at university or graduate level to apply for international fellowships or international scholarships. So is there any special consideration for this kind for fellowships for Sudanese, particularly for students at the grad level, will be appreciated. So that's also even resources that should be also appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Manal. Thank you very much. And the last question, please, Abdul Majid.
Yes, the last question will be going to Muhammad and Norman. I will unmute you and unmute yourself, Muhammad and Norman.
And I appreciate if you can be brief, Muhammad. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Samah, and greetings to all. I really miss being inside there. I think that I know everyone who is attending in person. So I will make it brief. My question is to Andy. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Hey, Andy, good to see you. So you explained that the Jeddah talk is meant to build momentum towards a permanent ceasefire that is going to allow for civilians to pick up and then lead a political process that ends up in a comprehensive political solution. That's fine, but it seems that like there is a gap, practical gap between handling the security issues on one hand and the political process on the other. Yes, we understand that civilians are facing the huge challenge of getting unified, but the unification just doesn't only apply to civilians. I think it is also should be applicable to the different initiatives and platforms that they are in motion right now. So my question is, what is the USJ's policy, or let me say specifically the state's efforts regarding the unification of the current initiatives? We have the IGAD, AU and IGAD, We have the Sudan's neighboring countries and Jeddah talks. Are there any efforts that, or policy at least, to unify all those three so that you can bridge the gap between the handling the security issues and the political track? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. Thank you to our in-person audience, and thank you to our online audience. I'll turn it to you, Jonathan. I know you're late to your appointment, but if you could just give us a few moments and touch on the answers to some of these questions, please. We'll keep Andy around for a little bit longer since you were late anyway. So we're going to keep you here and make you late to wherever you have to go next. So, Jonathan.
Okay, I would really love to stay longer as well, and I don't see that as a penalty because I appreciate the questions. I'd like to recommend the young man who came up and spoke. It's really important to hear the next generation, and I look around at some of you with. I look at some of you in here with some gray hair like mine, but maybe even a little more gray, and I look to you and I say, I know you've gone through the marathon, and I respect all you've done, but it's wonderful to hear the hope and be reminded of it. A lot of questions here, and I do welcome follow-up discussion. I think a lot of the questions, I can feel the emotion in some of them, and I don't blame that. And I again, when I look at the people, I want to also note that the people in the US government that are committed to Sudan, I've been on Sudan for a couple of years now, but it's extraordinary to me the number of people who are committed over decades of their careers to Sudan in the USAID, in the State Department, in the National Security Council, and in the Congress. It's amazing. Even our own administrator, Samantha Power, 2 decades ago was a journalist in Darfur. So the commitment and the interest really is there, and I just wanted people to know that. I heard a lot of really interesting questions. I'm going to touch on them. It's not going to be satisfactory, but I will try a little bit. There were a couple of points in there I would just like to say. The issue of accountability came up. The issue of disarmament came up. And these get into issues, in my opinion, around transitional justice, how you hold people accountable for past crimes, but then at the same time, looking at how you move the country forward and not prevent people from digging in further out of fear that they're going to be held accountable. It's a very tricky space to navigate. And I have to say, it's the Sudanese space to navigate. I've been through peace processes before. I've seen how they're done elsewhere. Nobody is satisfied with the results, but it is the tension that's going to have to be dealt with. The US government has been involved in reintegration of people. Eventually, people are going to have to put down arms. People are going to have to reintegrate into society if you're really going to phase out of peace. Right now, that is so far out in terms, I have to admit, there's a lot of steps that need to be done on the diplomatic and political front that the country is going to have to face to get to that point. Thank you very much to the kind lady who brought up the issue of the attacks on women in the country, which is widespread. Rape used as a tool of war, it's horrendous. It is extraordinarily widespread, and it is something that we look at very closely. We do provide support through our humanitarian programs, through our development programs, and again, through local organizations, providing trauma support, psychosocial support, and helping document things as best we can of what's happening to them, medical support as well. I also want to just put a point on one of the callers in who talked about the blockages of humanitarian assistance and the concerns about the resources or lack thereof. And this is very true that the impediments are extraordinary, and it's hard. It's extremely difficult for the humanitarian workers who are on the ground and in the region overseeing this work, because these folks who work in the humanitarian realm are as committed as people can be. People who work in humanitarian assistance, their They don't want to hear about the politics. They don't want to hear about anything. They want to help people in need. And when they're faced with people with guns who are stealing things from them at gunpoint, when they're dealing with officials who are saying you can't go there unless you do this, that, and the other, trying to figure out how to navigate these systems in a way that allows things to move is the #1 driving force for them. That's what they're trying to do. However, it gets back to the importance, again, of a ceasefire. This gets into the importance of the Jeddah talks around trying to work with parties who are holding up a lot of the assistance to open up access, to make things flow. And so we've got to absolutely work with them on those fronts. That's why one of the reasons why we have to talk with them during the last round of Jeddah talks that did open up and create certain levels of accountability and opening humanitarian assistance to be delivered. It's still not satisfactory for anyone, but we continue to fight the good fight on those fronts, and we're going to continue to do so. I think I'm going to have to stop there and beg your forgiveness for my departure, but I really appreciate it, and I hope to hear more and engage more down in the future.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Thank you. Shukran jazilan. Thank you. So Andy, now we'll turn it over to you. لا خلي شوية هاي شكرا يا خالدة بس نحن بنجي الترابيزة بعد شوية الآن. طيب جوناثان ما أخذ باصة. Jonathan, I think you have some Sudanese baklava, but you've been asked to try some Sudanese baklava. It's right here. Yeah. Thank you, Khalda. Shukran يا أستاذة خالدة. Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Thank you. All right, so one for the road. For the road, yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Andy, now it's your turn. So you've got, I think, 12 questions to answer. So we'll leave it to you to tackle this.
Thanks, Samah. No, first of all, I just want to start with thank you again for bringing up the issue of the women and making sure that that's front and center in this conversation. There's no question that women and young girls and children are bearing the brunt of this violence and this conflict. The United States has been unequivocal and very strong in our public statements in calling out these crimes of conflict-related sexual violence, calling out the crimes of horrific rape and gang rape and the assault on women that is not only assaulting their bodies, but assaulting their ability to play a role in the future of Sudan. And we know that. We've been very clear on it. Those crimes have formed the basis of some of our sanctions, actions, and some efforts on accountability or to promote accountability. So that is very key. And I think it's doubly important as I look around this room and then also speak to colleagues and friends who are dialing in, how critical it is then for initiatives and political processes and for the leaders of civil groups to make sure that there is space for women in leadership roles in what you're doing and that the processes going forward. That was missing during the framework political agreement process to a large degree. It can't be repeated. It has to change. And so that's a message, I think, a commitment that we have. I can commit to you that in all of our engagements, we make that point very clear, that political processes going forward and conversations about the future of Sudan must must be diverse, must be broad-based, must include women and youth and people from marginalized communities. And so I call on civilian leaders and those who are driving processes to make sure that that is true in reality. I think then it goes to the question of accountability too, that you raised. Please be sure, and I think if I understood your question, you know, you talk about accountability, you talk about the crimes, and yet you're sitting at the table with some of the people who have done it. So you're just making the same mistake over again. I think that was the essence of your critique. But I just want to, I think you've seen that we have not been shy publicly and by naming and targeting and sanctioning the people that we have and the institutions that we have. We're not shy to call these people out. We're not hesitant to make sure that we are calling attention to the crimes for which people are responsible. I think at the same time, and it goes to this question, then someone else's question about why are you talking to the Burhans or why are you talking to the warring parties? But I think there's also a recognition that if our priority is to end this conflict, at least our immediate priority, and if our immediate priority is to end the suffering and to silence the guns and get to a place where there can be momentum toward a cessation of hostilities and some political process that is Sudanese civilian led, then we have to talk to the people with the guns. I mean, it is as distasteful as it is, how as frustrating and angry and distasteful, again, I'll use that word, to sit across a table from representatives of forces who are engaged in the kind of activity that you rightly called our attention to. But you have to do it. I think that is a reality that we need to just, I think, and people can disagree, and that's the value of these conversations, but there is a time when the warring parties need to be in a room. We have to have negotiations that can lead to an end to the conflict. So that is one of the just realities of this initial phase. But I do want to say that does not mean acceptance of behavior. That does not mean a United States endorsement of what has been done, nor endorsement of the role going forward. And again, look back at what the secretary said very clearly in his video message to the Sudanese people, May 22nd. He was unequivocal that the behavior of the warring parties has meant that they are not fit for governance, and that the future of governance is a democratic Sudan led by Sudan civilians. He's very clear. So then I think it gets to, you know, the questions of disarmament and the questions of security sector reform and those kinds of questions. Again, that goes to this important point about, and Jonathan's right, that's a bit further down in the future. But that gets to that point of cessation of hostilities and who's in control of that longer term process. And so Jeddah is about, let's silence the guns, let's get in some humanitarian assistance, let's try and ease the suffering. But it is for Sudan civilians, when you have created the foundation for this political process, that you're going to have some tough work, and you'll have the backing of the United States. You'll have the support of your partners for sure. You can rely on that. But the work of figuring out those difficult things of what does a unified security force look like? What does a future command structure look like? What is the role of an army under a civilian governance? These are difficult questions that are political in nature. And so that's why that's not the stuff that's getting talked about in Jeddah. That's the stuff that's going to have to be talked about when there is a political process up and running that Sudan civilians, you are running and in charge of. So that's very important. Now, again, and when we get back to the urgency of setting that process up, and there's a bit of a tension often in even the messaging you'll hear from US officials, where it's, we support you, we know this is hard, take your time, you've got to have these conversations. And then at the same time, we're saying, well, but hurry up about it. And I know that can be frustrating and it can sound discordant. But I do think that once you've got a process up and once you've got a framework for civilians to speak in as unified a voice as possible, that's when you and the power of your voice really comes into being. and that you can then call on the parties to stop fighting. You can call on the parties to facilitate the entry of needed humanitarian assistance. You can signal to the belligerents and that they cannot dictate Sudan's post-conflict future. And that you can then also message that Sudan's future civilian government has to be more inclusive, has to be broader based, so that it's stable and can really reflect the country. So that's the importance and why it is so critical for civilian processes to start up and begin to really coalesce. Let's see if I had any other. Oh, and then on the one question about the proliferation of initiatives, it's true. That could be a challenge. It could be difficult, but I also think it presents somewhat of an opportunity when you think of that there is some organization and an effort to try and make sure that Sudan's neighbors are speaking with one voice and are focused on responding to the refugee crisis, that can be mobilized and leveraged to try and make sure that this conflict is ring-fenced and goods and material support are not coming into the belligerent sides. It's great that you've got the African Union really looking at how do you create a broad-based, inclusive, international and regional platform that can last and be stable. It's wonderful that you've got the energy of the IGAD quartet heads of state out there at the heads of state level who are willing to engage and really try and use the leverage and power that they have to influence the outcome. And then that you've got partners in the Jeddah talks who are really trying to use that leverage to get the parties to stop fighting and to talk and negotiate. And so the job that we are doing, and I can assure you that one of the big things that is a focus of our diplomacy is to try and harmonize all those efforts. And I think there's a big center of the Venn diagram where everything comes together and overlaps, and that's the powerful diplomatic space that we're trying to harness. Did I do okay?
What do you think? Did Andy do okay? Okay, so they've answered for you, Andy. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm going to leave you all with three parting messages. One, I think we've heard very clearly from Jonathan and Andrew that the United States supports a broad-based, inclusive, civilian-led process to chart the future of Sudan. That's number one. Number two, the interest and the engagement has been exceptional. Thank you so much for your presence. Thank you for everyone here in this ballroom right now. To those of you who've traveled, who've made personal sacrifices, who've left aside your work, left aside members of your family to be here. Thank you so much. Thank you to our in-person audience. I know that it's 6 plus 7, it's 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m. for some of you online. You're in Uganda, you're in Cairo, you're in Nairobi, you're in Khartoum. Thank you so much. I've counted more than 25 questions pending from the floor, from the chat, from my text messages and my WhatsApp. So I know I'm in a lot of trouble, but we have a promise for a follow-up session. So thank you very much. We've talked about the Jeddah process. We've talked about U.S. strategy towards Sudan. We've talked about the regional mechanisms, AU, IGAD, and the neighboring countries' mechanisms. We've talked about humanitarian assistance and funding. We've talked about gender and sexual-based violence. We've talked about civilian engagement in the ongoing negotiations. We've talked about transitional justice. We've talked about the flow of arms and finances in fueling the war in Sudan. And we've talked about the influence of regional actors like Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.